So, today on the podcast, we start to look at the final projects of Disney legend Mary Blair, a person that many believed was Walt's favorite artist. We're now at the point where Mary is focused on Disney World, largely the mural for the Contemporary Hotel, but also on other projects for the resort overall. And her work on Disney World is set against a very difficult period in her personal life, with her husband in jail and one of her sons being treated for schizophrenia. The post-impressionistic painter Vincent van Gogh once said that art is to console those who are broken by life. And this statement is at least partially true for Mary, especially as she moved through her final years. And with that, let's move into today's episode. For the first half of 1971, Mary was focused on the mural for the Contemporary Hotel. As she was living alone with Donovan in a treatment center, Kevin off at college, and Lee in jail, she could focus her energies on her art and also travel to Burbank and Glendale as she needed. She also again had a cat, which she named Ferrari, who kept her company. But then at the start of the summer, her life again began to change. Kevin returned from Otero College in Colorado. He had graduated, but not in engineering as he'd hoped. His classes in engineering hadn't gone well. As Kevin put it, I screwed up my first year. So he left with an associate's degree in the liberal arts. This, he believed, wouldn't help him much on the job market. But he was happy to come out to his parents' new house in SoCal, even if Mary was the only one living there at the time. When I came back from college for the first 8 months or so, it was just my mother and me living at the house, Kevin explained. We were a lot closer than we'd been before. My mother and I developed our own routine. He looked for work without much success. He also spent his days swimming in the backyard pool, and at night he had dinner with Mary. They'd watch TV, westerns in particular. She liked Bonanza, Kevin added. Once the ceramic mural tiles were on trucks to Florida, Mary took on other assignments for Disney, mostly focused on the Polynesian Hotel. It was clear at this point that for the October 1st soft opening of Walt Disney World, only the Polynesian Hotel might be able to accept a reasonable number of guests, as the Contemporary, with its experimental modular design, was weeks behind schedule. To make sure that the Poly opened on time, Disney gave Mary another round of assignments for this hotel as well. She created wall art for the Great Ceremonial House, including paintings that featured her iconic children, arranged in grass skirts, traditional wooden masks, and other luau attire. She also created art for hotel rooms in various longhouses located around the lagoon. It fell to Mary, Roy E. Disney explained, as a last-moment request to do something to hang on the bedwall of the Polynesian rooms. She may well have done it in a very short time, as everything was done in those last frantic days before the opening. But I truly believe it was impossible for Mary to do anything that wasn't beautiful, as was that particular piece. With this, Mary's art now would be one of the main design elements that unified the entire resort. Her iconic children would be featured on It's a Small World at the Magic Kingdom, in the wall art for the Polynesian, and of course in the massive mural at the Contemporary. Along with Mickey and other key Disney characters, the stylized images produced by Mary would give the new resort a connected sense of visual identity. In the weeks leading up to the resort's grand opening, one of the major points of concern for Disney managers was the Contemporary Hotel. As Disney had no experience building or operating a hotel, they initially followed the Disneyland model. In Anaheim, Walt Disney Productions owned Disneyland, but the Disneyland Hotel, through a land lease arrangement, was owned and operated by the Rather Corporation. A similar situation was initially arranged in Florida, with U.S. Steel building the hotels on land that Disney owned. U.S. Steel would build the hotels at their expense, and then Disney would operate them with the profits divided between the two companies. But various construction delays, mostly related to work overseen by U.S. Steel, put the Contemporary in jeopardy of opening on time. At one point, U.S. Steel even said the Contemporary might not be finished by the beginning of 1972. This eventually led to Disney managers taking a far larger role in overseeing construction. When the tiles arrived midsummer, the Contemporary was far from finished. Notes from a July 14th inspection revealed that the monorail beam was not yet connected to the hotel. The monorail on test runs would move from the roundhouse located behind Fantasyland over to the Contemporary, but at that point the beamway simply stopped. The beam became a cliff dropping off into the dirt below. Beamway completion was a priority, but even after being flagged as a high-level issue, the beamway would remain unfinished through most of August. But the beamway was only one concern. When Tony Baxter, a young designer, first entered the Contemporary during a nighttime monorail test, he found welders working on the upper floors, their sparks falling like gold dust down through the partially illuminated interior. The Contemporary was a canyon of steel and cement. It featured a massive indoor courtyard, cross-hatched with scaffolding. It was, he said, a sight straight out of a sci-fi movie. A cross between the post-apocalyptic Planet of the Apes and the futuristic 2001: A Space Odyssey. A mix of construction lights and work platforms, and beneath it all, the rhythmic movement of machines doing their necessary work. Outside, long-reach cranes surrounded the building. Materials were stacked on dirt for hundreds of feet in any direction. And needless to say, nothing was landscaped. The Contemporary Hotel, even with the resort's grand opening only a couple months away, was a cement-toned A-shaped building surrounded by a big apron of dirt. It was in this environment that a group of craftspeople reassembled Mary's mural, square by square, on the central elevator core, one of the few finished surfaces in the hotel's atrium. It would take the team 2 months, likely from late July through late September, to install the 18,000 tiles, transforming the original hotel designs into something far more artful, even if the hotel still lacked all of its stairs and finished public areas once the mural was complete. The mural was one artist's vision of the Grand Canyon, an image deeply touched by color. As with the Disneyland murals, Mary was allowed to sign her artwork with her stylized signature formed from raised lines on a ceramic tile. But this time, Mary wasn't the only person honored with a signature line. Just below her signature was that of Dora Delarios, the lead artist who oversaw the development of the ceramics. Then below that, other artists who worked on the project. Also arranged into the overall mural was one error. With the difficult design process in which the image was broken down into thousands of individual tiles that then were reviewed in segments in California, as there was no room to view the entire ceramic mural at interpace, it's amazing that there was only one error. The error involved a goat, whose body covered 8 different tiles, with its legs spaced over 3 of those tiles. The problem likely happened when transferring the leg design onto ceramic tiles. The team in California accidentally added 1 leg, making the creature into a 5-legged goat, or 5-legged ram as it was sometimes called in its early years. Over time, fans would invent a popular story that claimed the error was intentional, that it was a way of including an imperfect element in an otherwise perfect work of art, thereby embracing the beauty of imperfections as to suggest that nothing humans create is ever perfect. But in 1971, when the mural was installed, the 5-legged goat was seen simply as a mistake. Shortly after the mural was installed, Emery Wister, a reporter for the Charlotte News, toured the hotel and asked about that unusual goat. Disney execs noticed that after the work had been done, Wister wrote, when informed how much it would cost to remove one of the feet, they shrugged and said, "Let the ram stand as it is." This story was also echoed in at least one other paper, Newport Daily News Press, where the reporter added, "A workman didn't discover the extra leg until the cement had set." According to Wister, the cost to remove the tile, remake it in California, and then deliver it to Florida for reinstallation would be $5,000 or $6,000. Probably more to the point, once Disney managers found the error, likely in September, they had far more important things to worry about, such as finishing the theme park for its October 1st soft opening date. Though initially Disney had hoped to open the entire Florida resort on October 1st, 1971, the entire resort wasn't ready to open. The Magic Kingdom was mostly finished, with a few exceptions, such as 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas, the Liberty Square Riverboat, and Peter Pan's Flight. The Polynesian had many longhouse rooms available for guests, even though a few hotel sections weren't yet finished. The Contemporary, however, was the furthest behind schedule. The A-frame building wouldn't be finished for weeks, even though Disney did put a few guests in garden wing buildings outside of the main tower. This meant that Disney needed to adjust their plans in terms of opening schedule. The plan all along had been to softly open the park on a weekday, while most people went to work or school. This was and remained scheduled for October 1st. Lower crowds would allow Disney to work out operational bugs before bigger crowds arrived later in the year. It would also allow Disney to fix operational issues before the grand opening ceremonies at the end of October, specifically from October 23rd through the 25th, 3 weeks after the park had first opened to the public. Long ago, Disney felt confident that by this time the entire resort would be running smoothly. But as it turned out, even by this date, the Contemporary would not be finished. Still, Disney wanted to feature the hotel in the grand opening ceremonies, events that would be filmed and edited into a 90-minute TV special, a show that would introduce the resort to about 27 million viewers across the country. Sections of the Contemporary were functioning but not open to the public. The restaurant on the top floor, for example, served food to managers while construction continued on the floors below. The focus now, though, was finishing the Grand Canyon Concourse, which would include a temporary platform where comedian Bob Hope, by far the best known of Disney's celebrity guests, would dedicate the hotel. The grand opening ceremonies were spread out over 3 days, with the last day focused on dedicating the Magic Kingdom, leaving the first 2 days for other activities. On the first night, Saturday, October 23rd, guests heard a performance by an international orchestra called the World Symphony in front of the castle. On the second day, Disney dedicated the 2 hotels. First, the Contemporary with remarks by Bob Hope and also a cocktail party. Then later, the Polynesian. In the middle of the afternoon, with cameras running, Bob Hope stepped off a blue-striped monorail, accompanied by 2 Disney tour guides. Together, they walked down steps to a temporary platform positioned directly in front of the mural, which meant that Disney had made the decision to use the mural as the backdrop for his comments and jokes. Beneath the platform was the open atrium filled with invited guests. Disney's goal was to present the atrium as something like an indoor air-conditioned park. In addition to interior decorators, Disney had also hired a landscape architect to fill the space with large potted plants, again extending the natural motif of the Grand Canyon. Bob Hope stood at the microphone, dressed in a gray suit, and looked around him, turning a little so he could take in the art created by Mary. "Well, how about this?" he said. "Is this place beautiful? How about that mural?" At this point, Hope seemed genuinely surprised by the size and scope of its design. He stepped away from the mic stand and ventured to the edge of the platform to better take in the view, his head angled up in admiration. "Look at that mural," he intoned. Then he returned to his mark to deliver a few jokes he'd written about Disney World. Mary herself was not at the dedication, but she did visit Florida that fall to see her finished work. Though she had seen segments of the mural in California as it was examined in sections, this was the first time she saw her mural fully assembled, arranged in an indoor park-like setting with trees surrounded by walls and rising floors that had been painted in colors to blend with her designs. "When I eventually went to the opening of Disney World in Florida," she said, "and walked into that gigantic concourse, my reaction was, oh, wow." The impression was strong enough that not long after she returned home, she displayed a few test tiles fired at Interpace at her house, added to the entrance hallway that featured art produced by her family. Now guests entering her house would see a proof or duplicate set of glazed tiles from her project at the Contemporary. They showed 2 Native American children happy at play. The presentation of the Pueblo Village mural in the Contemporary Hotel was a high point in Mary's career, a piece of art that over time would be viewed by hundreds of millions of visitors. But her independent work on this mural also foreshadowed a change in Mary's relationship with the Disney company. For years, Mary had been protected and promoted by Walt. After his death, Roy Disney enacted a company plan that essentially moved forward with concepts initially developed by Walt and replicated other projects that Walt had approved for Disneyland. 2 months after the formal opening of Walt Disney World, Roy died from a cerebral hemorrhage. He was 78 years old. Younger executives promoted to lead roles, specifically Card Walker and Don Tatum, wanted to move Disney in a different direction, to better connect with a contemporary audience. As a result, the Disney company began to distance itself in small ways from a few artists who intimately knew Walt. This shift involved not only Mary, but other key artists such as animator Ward Kimball, the songwriters, the Sherman Brothers, and even designer Rolly Crump. For a company whose employees would repeatedly ask, what would Walt do? New management wanted the freedom to expand the company in directions slightly beyond what Walt envisioned. They would find it difficult to do this if there were too many people on hand, such as Mary, who had a very good idea of what Walt would have actually done. Beyond this, rivalries shaped a small portion of how new assignments were made. For some managers at Disney, Mary had not only been too close to Walt, but also too much of an individual talent. Among those who saw the situation from this perspective was longtime artist John Hench. Both John and Mary had been hired by Disney at about the same time, John in 1939, Mary in 1940. But in the years that followed, John watched as Mary was promoted into unique assignments while he, though still important to the company, was given slightly less prestigious assignments, particularly in the 1940s and early 1950s. A few at WED understood that he carried a private grievance about how he had been treated during his first decade or 2 at Disney. He was now an executive manager at WED. According to Alice Davis, there was this group of men, initially from the background department, especially John Hench, who were so jealous of Mary they couldn't stand it. That's why after Walt died, John wouldn't lend a hand to give her a job. Mark Davis added, Walt loved what Mary did. Well, finally when Walt passed away, they just kind of wrote her off the books. After Disney World opened, TV programs, newspapers, and magazines across North America presented images of the new Disney resort. The most popular image was, of course, of the castle. Not far behind were images of Mary's mural. This level of public visibility gave her celebrity status in some art circles. But that status did not easily translate into work from other patrons or companies. This break in Disney employment prompted Mary to both focus on her own art, which now included both watercolors and ceramics, and to look for illustration assignments in California. She assembled samples of her work into a portfolio, proof pages from children's books published by a major commercial publisher, and print ads from large circulation magazines. Then reached out to galleries and advertising firms mostly in the Bay Area, in search of assignments or representation. Despite her prestigious design history, she mostly found rejection, echoes of what she'd heard 6 or 7 years earlier in New York, that her illustrations were too closely tied to the dominant styles of the 1950s, and that her style didn't speak to a modern audience. I remember her lamenting to me. A friend recalled that she'd visit advertising agencies and galleries in San Francisco without much luck. Another friend, Alice Davis, recalled the worst of these visits. Mary put a portfolio together and went to San Francisco, and there was some young little snothead of this top agency. He looked at her work and told her that she was a has-been and had no style. In Alice's estimation, Mary's inability to find work was one of the key problems she faced in reconfiguring her life in California, missing out on assignments that might have moved her into that joyous space she'd often found when working on projects for Disney. One highlight of her return to California were the time she spent with her sisters, nieces, and mother. Family photos show Mary with them at dinners, outings, and parties, her eyes holding muted joy, her lips upturned into a smile. At one point, Mary proposed that together she and one of her sisters start a small design company. Inspired by her cat, she thought she might design elegant and playful feline accessories for the home. She got an idea for a small company, her niece explained. To her sister Peggy, Mary said, "You sew and I can design." Her plan was to create a prototype for a cat bed and play center. She called the bed a caterpillar, her niece added. It was a shocking pink circular pillow on the bottom and a terry cloth plush, and then around the outside was a plush green caterpillar, and the caterpillar had eyes and antennae on it. Really, really cute. Mary named the small design company after her cat, Ferrari and Associates. But this, too, didn't take off. When Lee was released from jail and the work farm, he was still drinking despite the alcohol classes he was required to attend. But beyond this, friends could see that he was beginning to change. He was starting to look at the world in a new way, even though he still had a chip on his shoulder. He was still bitter about how his career had turned out. He wasn't strongly remembered for his work in animation, both for Disney and other studios, and his work in New York had been focused on creating commercial films for TV and industry, which, aside from providing an income, did not leave him with much of a legacy either. In many ways, though, the focus of both his and Mary's lives now was more on Donovan than it was on either of them. Donovan's issues involved stress, anxiety, and substance abuse. My parents tried to get him away from the East Coast drug culture, Kevin explained, but Santa Cruz had its own. These elements could, in turn, trigger disorganized thinking, fear, paranoia, and occasionally violence. Though clearly Donovan needed professional help, the Blairs were hoping to shift him from being treated fully in an institutional facility to managing his schizophrenia in an outpatient setting. To advance these plans, they set up a room in their new house for him. They understood they would need to manage his care at home. To assist with this, they wired his room with an intercom so that any time, night or day, he could use the system to contact his parents if he needed help. Despite her love for Donovan, Mary recognized that he could be unpredictable, particularly at night. "Well, it's kind of strange sleeping with your bedroom door locked," Mary confided in one friend. Still, it seemed a reasonable plan to partially mainstream Donovan back into regular life. But one night, not long after Mary and Lee had gone to bed, Donovan began to look at the intercom system in his room, a little box with a speaker and a microphone. And in his late-night logic, he wondered if the intercom wasn't actually a mechanism to spy on him while he was alone. This thought, which was the first in a tragic series of dominoes, triggered his paranoia, which then triggered a flight response that involved anger. Mary and Lee could hear Donovan moving through the house, pounding on walls and breaking things, including a few pieces of art. Then he pounded on their locked bedroom door with something hard and solid like a stick or a bat. Lee went forward, presumably protecting Mary and giving her time to escape out the bedroom window and run to the neighbors. Lee was hit a few times, but eventually he too would escape out the window. After a call was made to local police for help, Donovan was taken in and returned to a treatment center. It's unclear if Kevin was also there that night, but generally he lived with Mary and Lee starting in 1971, though he would at times spend time away from the house. Regardless, Kevin was aware of the issues that surrounded both his brother and his parents. Despite this episode, Lee and Mary both looked for additional opportunities to bring Donovan back home, likely once he was on better medications, and help him find a place with daily society when he was ready to engage it. Still, this episode was another event that, along with her career struggles, suggested to Mary that the main centers of her life, her marriage, her sons, and her career in art, were continuing to slip little by little further away from her. Kevin's takeaway from these problems was that he needed to find his own space to grow into adulthood, a space away from the problems he saw at home. In the spring of 1973, he secretly joined the Navy at a recruitment office, something he didn't tell his parents about until the night before he left for boot camp. His parents both seemed to understand his decision, as it would give him direction and purpose in life, even if Mary remained concerned that he would be deployed to Vietnam. He signed up for 6 years, with both boot camp and his eventual deployment tied to the naval base in San Diego, which meant that his likely assignment would be on a ship patrolling the Pacific. Military service suited him. It gave his life structure and purpose, also a space that felt like his own. "Well, I really enjoyed it," he said, versus all the turmoil that was at home. When he graduated from boot camp, Lee and Mary drove down to San Diego to celebrate. They took photos of their son in uniform, his hair now clipped short, his body beginning to fill out with muscle. They went out to dinner. Then Lee and Mary traveled back north to SoCal. Initially, Kevin believed that the Navy would lead to a military position where he might work with rockets and missiles, but he soon learned that he lacked the technical training for such a career. Once he saw his actual options beyond those early dreams fanned by the recruitment process, he focused then on how he might use this opportunity to train for a role that would lead to meaningful work beyond being a basic seaman. Toward the end of 1973, he applied for and was accepted into the Navy Fire School located in the Great Lakes. There he learned how to manage shipboard and aircraft fires, along with the technical, chemical, and safety elements of military firefighting. With the training, he was promoted into a position as a fire control technician, a position that would soon move him from the rank of seaman to petty officer. That was one of the bright spots for the Blairs in early 1974. The other bright spot concerned a performance arranged by the San Francisco Symphony. The symphony's director, Seiji Osawa, wanted to expand a performance concept that he had explored in previous years. A couple years earlier, when presenting opera, the symphony had projected drawings made by children, which helped the audience follow the vocal story, even though the vocal performance was in a foreign language. Now Osawa, when planning for another operatic piece, wished to improve the level of visual presentation for a performance of L'Enfant by Ravel. The performance sung by members of the opera and a chorus would be in French. So to clarify the story, Osawa planned to use a drop screen on which would be projected illustrations that, like slides, would present the narrative. Initially, Osawa contacted the Disney studio to see if one of their artists would be able to provide illustrations, perhaps about 100 of them. L'Enfant was the story of a young boy who, after refusing to do his homework, lashes out at furniture and small animals around him, including a cat and squirrel. Then the narrative shifts to a surreal fantasy sequence set in a garden where the wounded animals confront the boy about his cruelty. Eventually, they see his regret as he tries to help those he has harmed. The opera was about childhood cruelty turning into empathy. The opera ends when the boy cries out, "Maman!" the childhood word in French for mother, or more aptly, mommy. Someone at the studio, understanding the opera would focus on a child's fantasy, thought that maybe Mary, then living about 80 miles south of San Francisco, might be interested in this assignment. A representative of the symphony agreed to reach out to Mary, not knowing she was at a serious crossroads, struggling with both professional and family problems. The director of the symphony, Seiji Osawa, believed that Mary might offer Disney-quality illustrations that could be projected during their performance, something that would elevate the musical experience. But for Mary, such an invitation, nearly identical to what she'd once tried to arrange for herself in New York, offered a possible path back into the world of professional illustration. Clearly a narrow path, but one that had the potential to anchor her life more closely to professional art once again. The plan right now is to be back next week with a new episode. As you can probably tell, we're getting toward the end of our story of Mary Blair. We aren't at the end yet, but we are getting close. And if you have been along for this entire ride, you now have a better understanding of Mary's work and also of the development of the Disney company than most people in the worldwide fan community who enjoy the films, parks, and experiences initially created by Walt and then expanded by other people who later followed him. I believe I started a focused collection on Mary Blair with an eye toward making a series like this about a decade ago. It takes years to put together these longer series, but also know this: even though we're getting to the end of this one, I'm already looking forward to other interesting topics that we might explore later this year and also next. Maybe some shorter topics at first before we jump into something again longer. And so with that, if you aren't yet over on Bandcamp, I'd like to invite you to support this podcast. We're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. On our podcast, the stories are never interrupted by ads. Our main source of support comes from listeners who sign up on Bandcamp to be monthly supporters. On Bandcamp, you will find hundreds of episodes not available anywhere else, including other multi-part series similar in scope to our presentation about the life and work of Mary Blair. You can support us by clicking over to dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in our show notes today. So, until next time, this is Todd James Pierce.